You may now be seated. Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Trulesta Pauling, and this is Jennifer Glenn. We are proud and honored to be your MCs for the Department of Veteran Affairs Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Commemorative Program.
Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge the Secretary of Veterans Affairs, Dr. David Shulkin, Ms. Vivica Wright-Simpson, Chief of Staff, all senior executives, our panelists, Ms. Tanisha Agramante and Dr. Stephen Redmond, our youth oratorical presenter, Ms. Utopia Diabe, and all VA employees in attendance.
Ladies and gentlemen, please stand and welcome Mrs. Lakita H. Campbell as she leads us in the national anthem, and remain standing for the invocation by Reverend Perdita Johnson Abercrombie.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Maybe we take a moment to reflect. Today, for the next hour, let us center in and focus on a man that rose above the crowds and became a symbol of hope and passion to all of us. We thank you for Martin Luther King Jr. and for the way he reminded us of your care and grace for all the little ones of the earth. We praise you today at this Dr. King commemorative program for the qualities that shaped his life, for a strong sense of justice that regarded all souls as having importance in your eyes, for an unshakable belief in love and gentleness that would not permit him to turn to violence in order to achieve his dream, for a commitment to sacrifice that led him forward without regard for his own safety, and for an ultimate trust in you that would never abandon those who would stand up for truth and righteousness in the world. We honor the man who gave the ultimate sacrifice, for a grounded belief that all people are created equal and should have opportunity to reach the mountaintop of their fullest potential. So we stand now ready to hear from our speakers, words that will once again inspire the hopeless, energize the weakened, and encourage the discouraged. Bless the program, bless the speaker, bless the hearers. Amen.
Thank you, Lakita and Reverend Johnson Abercrombie, for that beautiful song and invocation. Today's program is presented in 3 parts. Part 1, entitled Marching for Peace, acknowledges the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King and the history of his speech during the March on Washington.
Delivered a speech that would define the civil rights movement and his legacy. This, of course, was his I Have a Dream speech, delivered on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial during the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom.
have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
The March on Washington served as a massive push for economic and political justice for African Americans. Held during the year celebrating the 100th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation, crowds marched on the National Mall to watch a variety of musical performances and speeches. Dr. King, a Baptist preacher and prominent civil rights leader, was scheduled to speak towards the end of the day, his debut on the national stage. Up until that point, King mostly addressed small crowds at black churches, rallies, or fundraisers. This time, he would be seen by nearly 250,000 people on the ground, as well as millions at home watching on television. This was an opportunity to reach a wide audience and persuade the public and the government to take action against racial injustice. The night before, King worked with a close group of advisors to get the speech just right. They worked through the night, settling on a final draft in the pre-dawn hours of August 28. Interestingly, the phrase, "I have a dream," a phrase he used in earlier speeches, was nowhere to be found in this copy. The words wouldn't manifest until almost halfway into Dr. King's speech, when gospel singer Mahalia Jackson, who had performed earlier in the day, called out to him from the sidelines to tell them about the dream. King set his prepared remarks aside and improvised the rest, crafting a soaring speech that would sear into the minds of millions of Americans.
No, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream.
The speech was divided into 2 parts. The first listed the injustices that African Americans faced: segregation, police brutality, disenfranchisement, and discrimination, and urged a call to nonviolent action. The second launched into King's dream of peace and racial harmony, a vision of a future in which people will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character.
I have a dream.
Highlighting King's skills as a preacher, I Have a Dream was part sermon and part poetry, using rhetorical devices like repetition, rhyme, and vivid metaphor to drive his points home. It was peppered with historic, biblical, and literary references that moved the crowd. This message of struggle and hope became the defining moment not only of King's career, but also the civil rights movement. Both the speech and the March on Washington were credited with helping secure the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, a landmark piece of legislation that ended segregation and banned discrimination on the basis of race or sex in the workplace.
Free at last! Free at last! Thank God Almighty! We are free at last!
The speech also resonated with activists around the globe. I have a dream. The phrase that wasn't even meant to be in his final draft appeared in political actions all around the world. It's considered one of the world's most transformative and influential speeches, alongside others like Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address and Winston Churchill's Blood, Toil, Tears, and Sweat. I Have a Dream is only one of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s many achievements, but it's nonetheless one of the most pivotal.
I am happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation.
I think I will always remember that I Have a Dream speech. I remember being 5 years old, sitting in front of the television, my mother making me and my siblings sit there and watch that. Some of us remember seeing this on our televisions. Today, we continue to have those marches and probably always will when we see injustices. At this time, Mr. Marvin Cornish, Protocol Officer for Washington, D.C. Medical Center will introduce the Secretary of the VA. Mr. Cornish.
Thank you, Jennifer. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. There we go. To all the veterans that are assembled, first and foremost, let me say thank you for your service. Whoa. All right. In the storied history of the Department of Veterans Affairs, the Honorable Dr. David J. Shulkin is our 9th to lead this organization. Nominated by President Trump to serve in this cabinet, it was clear early on that Dr. Shulkin was indeed viewed as a true leader. On February 14, 2017, he was confirmed by the U.S. Senate by a vote of 100-0. Prior to becoming our secretary, Dr. Shulkin was appointed by former President Barack Obama and served as the Undersecretary for Health after being confirmed unanimously by the U.S. Senate again in July of 2015. As our secretary, Dr. Shulkin represents 21 million American veterans, is responsible for the nation's largest integrated healthcare system with over 1,200 sites of care, serving 9 million veterans, and leads an organization that provides essential benefits to veterans, including disability payments, educational assistance through the GI Bill, and home loans that have helped millions of American families. Prior to coming to the VA, Dr. Shulkin was a widely respected healthcare executive, having led hospitals and health systems. Harold S. Janine, former president of the ITT Corporation, once said leadership is not so much in words as in attitude and in actions. As such, Dr. Shulkin remains a practicing internist, having the distinction of being the first VA secretary to see veterans as their physician. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Honorable Dr. David J. Shulkin.
Well, thank you all for being here, and I appreciate the opportunity to spend a little bit of time with you. First of all, Reverend, thank you for that great invocation. I think it was meaningful. And Ms. Campbell, beautiful rendition of the national anthem. Thank you. I do have to say that I think VA must have some of the best voices and singers in the federal government. I mean, I'm just always amazed at the talent we have. And Sabrina's not here today, huh? So, but now you're going to be on my list too. But I always like when I come to an event, I want Sabrina to sing a song. But how many, was there anybody here who was at that march? Yeah, you were there? Yeah, only one, huh? That must have been an incredible day, huh? 7 years old, right. I remember one of my earliest memories was when Martin Luther King was assassinated. And it's interesting, I actually don't have many childhood memories. I was 4 years old, but I remember that day. And I remember how upset people were. How many people remember that day? That's interesting. Yeah. And, when you're 4 years old, you don't really understand why that was meaningful or the impact of the man or what he stood for. But, I think what Martin Luther King stood for in his message and is just as relevant and necessary today as it was more than 50 years ago. And I think we all know that, and the fact that we all are here gathered together to remember what he stood for is just incredible. But particularly for those of us who are serving in VA and have the mission that we have, remembering what Dr. King stood for and